are in the book of Genesis. We're starting again in our study, our 3.5-year Bible survey. And the setup of this particular arrangement is designed to have the adult class 1 quarter ahead, so that those of you who will be teaching this material next quarter can be refreshed in the material. You may be breaking it down or teaching it in different ways, hopefully better than I'm teaching it, but the idea is that we might be renewed in our remembrance of it and maybe in our study of it, so that in July, Lord willing, we can go out and teach this material to others. We had left off in chapter 3, and we were finishing up there. Chapter 3, of course, has to do with the fall of man. In fact, I think that's probably the term we would put on it. If we think about chapter 1, what is a good summary of chapter 1? 6 days of creation. Chapter 2, humanity in the garden, maybe, or you could say it better than that. That's really what. And then chapter 3, we have the fall of man. But again, all these titles, I suppose, really are abbreviations, aren't they? They leave some things out because there are other things that could be said. So when it comes to chapter 3, we certainly read about the fall, don't we? But what else do we read about in chapter 3? Don't we also read about the first hint at redemption? I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, you shall bruise his heel. And so we have there, I think, also the idea that God is working a plan of salvation, and that the head of the serpent will be crushed by the seed of woman. In this particular case, through death he might destroy him that have the power of death, that is the devil, and release those who through fear of death were all their lifetime subject to bondage. Or Colossians chapter 2. Christ defeated all the powers and forces, and he let the whole world see them being led away as prisoners when he celebrated his victory. We got down to about verse 20, I believe, and there we find in the aftermath of the fall this note, that Adam called his wife Eve because she was the mother of all living. Eve, in the original language, is a word which means life giver. And so it is Eve who is the mother of all living. It's one of the reasons why I think we can be certain that any theories about there being some pre-Adamic race are just not biblical. Because as far as the Bible is concerned, Eve is the mother of all living, not somebody who lived before Eve or some other story that people find between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2. So Eve is the mother of all living. And unto Adam also, verse 21, and to his wife did the Lord make coats of skin and clothe them. What's been made before, when they ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and realized they were naked, what did they do? They made fig leaves, this kagara, this garment about the midsection. But then when the Lord was walking through the cool of the evening into the garden there, what did Adam say? Why did he hide himself? He was naked. Yeah, the word naked doesn't necessarily always mean without any clothing, but insufficient clothing. Scanty clothing. So, boy, it's been made, and I think it's truly made, that these folks were only fully clothed now in a garment that God gave them. And God's provision, I think, is clear. Even though these folks have let him down so, he still provides for them. Verse 22, the Lord said, behold, the man is become as one of us, to know good and evil. Now, lest he put forth his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever. It seems that the tree of life was the way in which the human body was sustained. And it would have gone on like that, well, indefinitely, until sin ruined everything. And so God says, because man has changed, now the arrangement has changed. And so in verse 23, therefore the Lord God sent him forth from the Garden of Eden to till the ground from whence he was taken. Everybody got this word there, sent, in verse 23? But have another word there besides the word sent. Same word. I think that the word might be translated expelled. I think it's a strong word. I think it suggests the idea of them being cast out of the garden. And that, I think, is taught in other places. When we read this passage, don't we think about something that Paul wrote in Romans chapter 8? In Romans 8, Paul is writing there about our hope in Christ and how that Christ has come to work a work that reverses the curse and that provides a way of hope for man whose sin caused him to be separated from the tree of life, a hope of being reunited with life in the life to come. Verse 19 of Romans 8, if you turn there with me, reads, "For the earnest expectation of the creature waits for the manifestation of the sons of God." For the creature, and I think he's talking about you and I, the creature, human beings, was made subject to vanity, not willingly, but by reason of him who hath subjected the same in hope. I think he's taking us back to the story we're reading tonight. The idea is that Adam and Eve didn't volunteer to leave the garden. They didn't rejoice in mortality. They were cast out. It was thrust upon them. But Paul notes, he said, even as God cast them out, there was still that hope, a plan that God had before the world began to redeem man from the mess that he had made. And of course, we know that is the gospel. Here it's quite veiled in Genesis 3, but it's there, crushing the head of the serpent. So man is cast out of the garden, sent forth. Verse 24, he drove out the man, and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden, the old translation says cherubims. What do you have in verse 24 there? Singular. Okay, yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, I couldn't hear quite well, but yeah. I don't know why. I still don't know why they put an S on that. The word cherubim is plural in form, isn't it? So why they thought the S was necessary, I'm not sure. They were smart folks. But anyway, anybody know what a cherubim is? Of course you do. I trust, but what comes to your mind when you hear that word cherubim? Plural for cherub. You go down to Kmart or Walmart or whatever's open these days, and you'll see little pictures of cherubs every once in a while at certain times, which little fat babies with wings. Nothing to do with that, is it? That's fiction. What's a cherubim? What are cherubim? Yeah, hard to say. Tempted to say angels, but we're not really sure. They're not called angels. They're called cherubim. We read about them in Ezekiel, don't we? Ezekiel 1. They are called living creatures, I think. And then in Ezekiel 10, they are identified with the name cherubim. They are distinctive, aren't they, in their appearance? There are a lot of things about them. What do you remember about their faces? That's also plural, isn't it? Yeah, they have 4 faces. So wherever they're at, they're facing every direction at once. So that's quite a thing. And don't you think that might be a factor here when he talks about how they're guarding the way to the tree of life? The Lord sent him forth from the Garden of Eden to till the ground from which he was taken. And so he drove out the man, placed him at the east of the Garden of Eden, cherubims, and a flaming sword which turned every way to keep the way to the tree of life. Yes, sir.
We don't know when this actually ended. I think is it thought at the flood? When things changed.
Yeah.
So you would have, is it conceivable that this would have gone on for quite some time?
Yeah, that's a great question. Don't know. Of course, we don't know. But I think we would all recognize we wouldn't go and find that place today. And I think the flood changed many things. But at some point, it was no longer necessary. And it may have been at the flood. But it certainly was effective, because we're going to see that men began to die physically, just as they had been set apart, cut off from God. Spiritually, they likewise will die physically. Anybody else have a point about chapter 3? Yes, ma'am.
I never noticed in 22 how God has an incomplete statement there. Do you have any thoughts about why that statement is not completed?
Yeah, that's a good question. The only thing I can think of is that he quotes, Moses does part of what the Lord says, and then he relates, as he's quoting the Lord, relating what he did. So obviously this was the plan, to send man back to the garden and to set up this barrier to him coming back. But that's about all I know to say, yeah.
Do you know of any other incomplete sentences that the Lord I just thought it was so odd
Yeah.
that he didn't finish what he was saying.
Yeah.
Was he so disappointed or sad that he just couldn't bear to
Yeah.
have it written or?
Yeah, just be speculation on my part, really. Yeah, but it's a moving moment, isn't it, when you think about it? And that brings up a good point. We might imagine God's emotion at this moment, and God is emotional. We know this to be so. Maybe our children, maybe somebody else very close to us. Their misdeeds hurt us as much as anything can hurt us. And we all know that. We've all felt that at some point in time. Maybe my children have felt that in me sometime. So this is not an easy thing, and it's not a happy thing when God sends his children out of the garden and he separates them from the tree of life. I think it's a hard moment. But it's something that God has planned for, and it's something that he handles with not just mercy, but justice. God is always just. And the mercy that comes in is a mercy that is at his expense. But God is always just. He's never going to join me in evil. And but I can sure break his heart when I do wrong, and I do. Yes, sir. Yeah, great. Absolutely. We were looking at that the other day in Isaiah. Isaiah, pictures Israel as they're facing the captivity, saying, well, God has forgotten us. And God says, can a nursing mother forget her child? Maybe, but no, I can't forget you. That is powerful. And we see here, we don't have the detailed words about God's feelings here, but we certainly, I think, can appreciate how hard this is to take a stand that he did. But God is righteous. When we choose evil, that's our choice. It's not his. Appreciate the questions. Anybody else have a question? Yes, sir.
When you think about it, and the fact that he revealed it so that we would have this account, and that we can consider like what we're doing right now, and you can look at it from different angles and stuff. But you got to know he wanted us to know this was a low point for man. This is something that you look at the simplicity of it. Man had everything. I mean, in the garden, he didn't lack anything. He had enough food. He had enough this and that, and it just lets you know that even when God does all he can to provide for us, and he gives us free choice to choose, we've got to be very careful. We've got to be very careful.
Yeah, so true. Well, chapter 4 is another familiar story. It's the story of Cain and Abel. That's at least the way I think of chapter 4. It has a little more to it than that. It has the descendants of Cain. But in chapter 4, beginning in verse 1, the old translation reads, and Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain, and said, I have gotten a man from the Lord. The word Cain suggests the idea of it's a verb to get. So it's a perfect word for her feeling here. I have gotten a man from the Lord. Something we'll not emphasize right now, but I want you to notice this, and maybe you already have. Notice in the book of Genesis how many times parents, women, consider their children to be a gift from God. God has given me this one. I mean, not once. Probably I could right now look at a half a dozen at least, probably more times when that point is made. And it's made here. I suppose what we could say is for all of us, children are a heritage of the Lord. Isn't that what the psalmist wrote? So we have to consider that and think about that. A heavy responsibility, yes, but a great gift as well. And so Eve thought of Cain that way. What did Eve think when Cain grew up to do what he did? She knew something of the pain of the Lord, didn't she? And she bare again, verse 2, his brother Abel. Anybody have a footnote about what the word Abel means? Yes, sir.
There's some things like bread or nothing, and also vanity or worthlessness, which I find very odd.
Yeah. If you studied Ecclesiastes recently, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. It's the word vanity there is I can't pronounce it. Habel in the Hebrew. That's Abel. That's Abel. That's what that is. That's quite interesting. I don't know why would she call him vanity. It's not explained, but I'm sure she was no less thankful for him, but maybe humbled by the fact that she's brought a child into a dying world now. That's different than it has been, or different than it was when they first enjoyed the garden. Yes, sir. You would point. Could be.
To see how his life,
Yeah.
ultimately,
It was cut short.
Not the example he left, and not how he
No.
conducted his life, but the fact that he lived so briefly, and it was kind of he was here and gone.
Yes, it could be. We're just not told. It's just interesting to think about. So, here are these two sons, Abel, a keeper of sheep, and Cain, a tiller of the ground. One's a shepherd, one's a farmer. In the process of time, it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto the Lord. Here's worship. Here's a gift that's brought. And Abel, he also brought of the firstlings of his flock and of the fat thereof. So Cain brings the fruit of the ground. Abel brings of the first fruits of his flock. And verse 4, here's the first worship that we read about in the Bible. And here's also the first unaccepted worship, rejected worship in the Bible. Because verse 4 says that the Lord had respect unto Abel and to his offering, but unto Cain and to his offering he had not respect. And Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fallen. God did not have respect to the offering of Cain. He does not explain to us here the reasons why. But I'm sure you've heard this before and thought of it before. Probably the closest explanation we have is Hebrews 11, isn't it? And we were looking at Hebrews not too long ago in our adult Bible class. And when you look at those great heroes in Hebrews 11, we find this footnote. Verse 4 of Hebrews 11 reads, by faith Abel offered unto God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, by which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gifts, and by it he, being dead, yet speaks. So what's special about Abel's offering that led to his being accepted according to the Hebrew writer?
He gave him the best.
Gave him the best, okay. More excellent sacrifice, yes sir.
He gave it in faith.
Gave it in faith. Faith is a key word there, isn't it? That's right. Yes sir.
And it was something that God, was pleased with, so it should have been a clue to Cain, okay, maybe I need to do this, which I think of things that go on today, and people give God whatever they want to, and,
Yeah.
they don't, they don't question whether God's happy with it or not, that going around, and here's a very simple situation here, and you see what can go horribly wrong when you don't.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Now, is this something that would have been constructed up or something that they would have just given to their creator?
Yeah. It's a fair question. I think, what's the precept that Paul taught us, where there is no law, there is no transgression? We're not given the rules here. And so that's why there's some question. All we know, I think, is Hebrews 11. But I feel confident that God would not have condemned one and accepted the other if they were not instructed about what to give. Now, what the problem was specifically, I think, as Brother Allen said, faith. But faith can be a lot of... I remember hearing, as a young Christian, the idea was that Cain offered from what? The ground. Abel offered from the flock. So there was the... Well, I don't know. Under the law of Moses, different law, didn't they have grain offerings? So maybe that was something to do with it. Maybe God said offer a blood offering. I don't know. Or it could be, as Markel suggested, maybe it had to do with the fact that he didn't give the more excellent... You have another translation of that in Hebrews? I'm turned away from there now. Hebrews 11 and verse 4. A more excellent sacrifice than Cain. Anybody got another translation besides that? What are you, a bunch of King James only people? We got one translation in here? Okay. Play on, I think, is the word. I've got a little note here. More in quantity or quality. So the bottom line is, I don't know. Maybe he didn't give enough, or maybe he didn't give the best, or maybe he gave the wrong thing. But whatever it was, all those are related to faith, aren't they? If God said give the best, and I don't, one way to look at that is I just don't trust him. I don't believe him. That's a faith problem. If he said give this instead of that, and I give what he said not to, that's a faith problem. So that covers it. But what the specific is, I don't know. I'm sure, as we were talking about, Cain knew what to do. He just decided not to. And God accepted it anyway, because after all, if it's offered with a willing heart, that's all that counts, isn't it? No, that's not the lesson we learn, is it? From the very start. The idea that men can worship God the way they want to, just choose the sacrifice of your choice, it's just never been true. And it's not true here. And what's more dangerous is that when Cain was called out for his faithlessness, what was his reaction? Angry, bitter. I know this from personal experience, from my own failures. When you let temper drive the bus, it's never going to go where you want to go. If I let my feelings and my anger and my hurt or my whatever, if I let that dominate my choices, it is always going to wind up in the ditch. And that's what the Lord told Cain here. And he challenged him in verse 6, why are you angry? Why are you angry? As if you've been wrong. Why are you angry? And why is your countenance fallen? Why are you so upset? You're proud instead of being penitent. He said in verse 7, if thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted? And if thou doest not well, sin lies at the door. And unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. You got something else for me in that last phrase in verse 7? Go ahead, sir. All right, what's the phrase before it?
It says, and his desire is for you, but you must master it.
Good, yes. You have something?
His desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over him.
Okay. But sort of the idea there, it's the same, is rule. How you doing with that, by the way? Don't answer to me, but how you doing with that? We're ruling over our temper? You ever let our attitude get off the track and start rolling, and the longer it rolls, the worse it gets? I think I can relate to that. And I think the Lord will say the same thing to you and me. He's talking here to Cain. He's saying, Cain, there are things awful, horrible ahead if you don't change the way you think. Well, that's a lesson that many of us have needed. But he doesn't take it. He does not heed the warning. So, verse 8 says, Cain talked with Abel, his brother. Some of the translations, I think the Septuagint reads something along the lines of, Cain said to his brother, let's go out to the field. The old translation reads, Cain talked with Abel, his brother, and it came to pass as they were in the field, that Cain rose up against Abel, his brother, and slew him, killed him. It's the first murder recorded, at least, in the Scriptures, not the last. Verse 9, the Lord said to Cain, where is Abel thy brother? Again, the Lord's not asking for information, is he? He's trying to get Cain to think about, what have you done? In fact, he'll say that in just a minute. And Abel says, I don't know. Am I my brother's shepherd? He's the shepherd. Not only is he allowing that temper and that hurt pride to lead him to do terrible things, but he's hard-headed and hard-hearted about it. Not the last time. The Lord said to him in verse 10, what have you done? The voice of thy brother's blood cries unto me from the ground. God, help me to realize, I just never am fooling him. Everything is open to him. And he says, what you have done is literally polluted the ground. Reminds us of the law of Moses over in Numbers 15 about the murder polluting the ground. In verse 11, we find the curse of Cain. And now art thou cursed from the earth, which hath opened her mouth to receive thy brother's blood from thy hand. So here's a curse upon Cain. Verse 12, when thou tillest the ground, what did he do for a living? He's a farmer. God has already sent thorns and briars into the world, hadn't he? But his seems to be something special. When thou tillest the ground, it shall not henceforth yield unto thee her strength. And then the latter part of 12 reads, a fugitive and a vagabond shalt thou be in the earth. You have another word for vagabond there? Wanderer. You know what the word is in the original? It's the word nod. That comes back in the story, doesn't it? And Cain said, I am so sorry. I deserve all of this. No, that's not what he said. He said, my punishment is greater than I can bear. He said in verse 14, behold thou. Who's thou? Pardon? The Lord, that's right, God. Thou hast driven me out this day from the face of the earth, and from the face, thy face shall I be hid, and I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth. And it shall come to pass that every one that findeth me shall slay me. And then verse 15, which has been a much discussed verse through the years. In the old translation it reads, and the Lord said unto him, therefore whosoever slayeth Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark upon Cain, lest any finding him should kill him. I guess the biggest question that people have about this verse is probably, the mark of Cain. What's the mark of Cain? There's the answer. We don't know for sure what it was. He does not explain it. I find it interesting. The word that's used here is the Hebrew word oath. O-T-H. I guess that's how you pronounce it. I'm not sure that's how I pronounce it. I'm from Pleasant Grove. Oath. But it is found a few other times. And it's used in a variety of circumstances. Let me see if I can remember. I think it's in chapter 9. Maybe chapter 9. Yeah, it is chapter 9. It's because it's about the rainbow. Verse 13. I do set my bow in the clouds, God said. We'll get there one of these days. And it shall be for a token of a covenant between me and the earth. It's the word sign. So the rainbow's a sign. Over in Exodus, it's used a couple of times there in reference to the Passover, Exodus 12. And in verse 13, the blood shall be to you for a token, same word, upon the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you. Here's a physical mark. In chapter 4, you remember when God commissioned Moses to go to Egypt, and Moses was reluctant to go at this point. And so what did God do? Verse 8, and it shall come to pass, if they will not believe you, neither hearken to the voice of the first sign, they will believe the voice of the latter sign. That's the word oath there, sign. What signs were there, you remember? Throw your rod down, it becomes a snake, then grab the tail, it becomes the rod again. And take your healthy hand, put it in your bosom, pull it out, it's leprous. And then, I don't know. I don't think that he gave Cain a rainbow necessarily, but the idea is here are some ways in which the word sign is used. Something that maybe would be about him or something that he could show someone else to say, the Lord has said, don't mess with me. Over in Joshua chapter 2, this was the word that Rahab used when she was saying to the spies, you know, I've helped you, you helped me. Verse 12 of chapter 2. Therefore, I pray you swear unto me by the Lord, since I have showed you kindness, that ye shall also show kindness unto me in my Father's house. Give me a true token. I'm not sure that there was anything except the word, that the promise, the oath that they took. Anyway, there was something that God gave to Cain in order to allow him to let people know God said, don't touch me. Don't. By the way, is that a curse or a blessing? That's a blessing, is it not? And we think this is a curse upon Cain. I've heard it taught that way. I've heard people just make all kinds of things up. This is actually God's mercy upon Cain. Which leads to really the biggest question to me is not what the mark was. It's something. The biggest question is, why would he give Cain a mark? Everybody's trying to kill me. Good. You deserve it. Sweep him out. I don't have an answer for that either, by the way. Unless it's the Lord over in, is it Matthew chapter 13, I think I'm thinking about? Yeah, that's Matthew's account, isn't it? Matthew 13. He told this story, a parable about a wheat field, and an enemy comes along and sows weeds in it, tares in it. And after a while, it becomes obvious that you got weeds in with the wheat. And they ask the Lord in the story, who's done this? An enemy has done this. And then this is verse 28 of Matthew 13. And the servant said unto him, wilt thou then that we go and gather them up? And if I hadn't read the story, what I would expect Jesus to say is, oh yeah, just do that now. We want rid of these things. What does he say, in fact? Not now. Not now. Wait, lest we pull up the wheat with the tares. I'm not sure now exactly what all that encompasses, but what one thing I think even I can learn from that is that it's God's will that there be. He allows, he is indulgent of the presence of evil for a time, for his own purposes. God is not evil, and God hates darkness. But this is not designed to be heaven, and there is a purpose even for folks like Cain in this world, in the big picture of things, much of which I can't understand. I'm too small to understand. So, God says, I will give you a mark, a blessing, a protection, so that you will not be wiped out before your time. Yes, sir.
Cain says, my punishment is greater than I can bear. We don't know the details of how he approached God with that, what his heart was about. But God showed mercy on him when he said that anyone who would go after him would come upon him sevenfold.
Yeah,
So
quite a strong statement.
he made that promise at that point.
Yeah,
He made him a promise, showing him mercy. So
right.
for a reason, like you said, God has his purpose.
He does. He
We don't know
does.
the entirety of it and what we're exposed to.
And he also has his limits. And he knows when,
Struck him dead. Look at how many people he has struck dead.
and he knows when the time is the time. And it's not my place to judge his timing, is it? That's right. Well, in the last few minutes here, let's look at the last part of the chapter. We've seen the story of Cain and Abel, but now we follow Abel's descendants. Cain's descendants. Verse 16. And Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod. What's Nod mean? Wandering. On the east of Eden, which again, I think that's probably in reference to the author of the book of Genesis, to the human author. It's out there, Eden is east of where Moses was, and even beyond that is the wandering land of Cain. That was his punishment. Verse 17 says, Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch. I don't think we need to stop and deal with the old where did Cain get his wife story, but I think you've read Genesis enough to know that this is not all given to us in linear time, that Adam and Eve had sons and daughters, children. There was one family, and from this family, however the genetics worked out, we find the human population being initially seeded. So, there were other people on the earth besides Cain, Abel, Adam, and Eve. And this is an example of that. So, Cain had a wife and had children. And when you read the names of his children, it's interesting to compare this with the next chapter. Bare Enoch. There are other Enochs, but this Enoch is the firstborn of Cain, it seems. And he builded a city and called the name of the city after the name of his son Enoch. So who built the city? Cain. What was Cain told to do? Wander. What's he doing? Not wandering. Shocker. And unto Enoch was born Irad, and unto Irad Mehujael, and unto Mehujael begat Methusael, and Methusael begat Lamech. This sounds a lot like the genealogy of Seth, but they're not the same names. It shouldn't surprise us to think that this family would have similar names. That shouldn't surprise me. But Lamech is the seventh in this list, and there's a Lamech who's the seventh, I think, in another list. But anyway, Lamech took unto him two wives. I'm sorry, not other. There's another seventh from Adam that's significant. That's another man we'll talk about later. But this is Lamech. And he's also a significant character in this family story. Lamech took unto him two wives. The name of one was Adah, the other of Zillah. Adah bare Jabal, and was the father of such as dwell in tents, and such as had cattle. His brother's name was Jubal, and he was the father of all as such that handle the harp and the organ being a wind instrument. Zillah, she also bare Tubal-Cain, an instructor and an artificer in brass and iron. The sister of Tubal-Cain was named Naamah, which according to one lexicon that I checked means loveliness. You think about all these people and their skill set. They were people who were well wedded to this world. They were skilled craftsmen. They were people who could no doubt provide well for themselves. They had physical beauty. They had worldly success. Now Lamech, we mentioned a moment ago, Lamech said to his wives, Adah and Zillah, by the way, the first polygamist that we read about in the Bible, not the last. Hear my voice, ye wives of Lamech, hearken unto my speech. For I have, the old translation reads, I have slain a man in my wounding, a young man to my hurt. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 70 and sevenfold. What's that sound like? Yeah. Have we read something like that recently? That sound like Cain. Is he mocking God here? Didn't God say he was going to avenge I'll avenge 70 and sevenfold. Boy, he is an arrogant something, isn't he? And so, we see the family of Cain, and it's a sad story, I think. Some of it implied, some of it seems to be rather obvious. But verse 25, there is, I think, another ray of hope, because Adam knew his wife again and bare him a son and called him Seth. Granted, another example of God granting a son, granting a child. For God, she said, hath appointed me another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. And to Seth there was also born a son, and he called his name Enos. And then men began to call upon the name of the Lord. We'll have to pick up there next time. What does that mean? And maybe how is that related to the list in chapter 5, and then leading up to this flood story in 6 and 7 and 8. So if you would please, in 9, feel free to read ahead, and we'll be looking there next time. I appreciate so much your kind attention.